On the podcast today, we are going to review the 81 meditations on the Tao Te Ching podcast series that Guiyang and I have been exploring for the last 4 years, which I believe is probably the most comprehensive exploration on the Tao Te Ching. And so we've been on this journey with all of you guys for 4 years. And today we're going to speak about our 3 favorite chapters. Well, sort of our 3 favorite chapters. We're not favorable to one chapter over the other. We could have like 20 favorite chapters here, but we've kind of picked 3 chapters each to kind of give you a good idea of where our thinking is on this great text and to explore those a little bit as well. But I wanted to say that for both Guiyang and I, we're probably, maybe like you guys, we are more favorable to the spiritual aspects of the Tao Te Ching rather than the later chapters when it gets more into how to control a nation, politics, etc. Even though that those chapters are important, but for us personally, almost like the first half of the Tao Te Ching, or at least under chapter 50, is where a lot of the sweet marrow of the Tao Te Ching is.
Yes, that's right. So my first favorite chapter is actually the first one. We can't skip the first one because the chapter 1 is actually the core of Lao Tzu's philosophy, actually. So he starts with the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao, right? So nameless and the named. And the primordial, the energy source where the named and nameless all come from is that the state of Wu Qi. And he doesn't obviously mention Wu Qi here, but I think that's what he mentions by the mystery darkness within the darkness that he mentions at the end. And he covers that named and the nameless, and you could also say form and the formless, right? The aspect of the entire universe, really. So he mentions that as in the center of the Tao and the Taoist philosophy. And through the chapter, he also mentions that the desireless can see the mystery and the desiring can see the manifestation. Here, obviously, he can interpret as a desire itself, but also I think he wanted to emphasize in a sense that desire can also be our preconceived, polluted perception of the world as well. So if you clear that out, you will see the mystery of the universe. If you can't clear your own conditioned mind, then you will see the manifestation.
Yeah, I feel like this is a perfect start to the Tao Te Ching, the first chapter. And when we were talking about these 3 chapters, I said I wanted this. You said, yeah. So we had to bargain a little bit here. But I think that it's a perfect gateway into understanding what the Tao actually is, right? Before we get into the other chapters. But then a lot of people may think it hits a pinnacle at the start, but then there are other great chapters after it as well, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right. So it's almost like if you truly understood chapter 1, you basically understood the entire Tao Te Ching, really, isn't it?
Right,
there's an important chapter that you mentioned at the end as well, but in a philosophical sense, that chapter 1 actually has it all, really, the core of philosophy of Lao Tzu and the most important elements of it too.
Yeah, that's right. It really tells you the spiritual principle of Taoism, basically, is in the first chapter. And like I said at the start, that's why you and I, these are the chapters that we really like in the Tao Te Ching. And they align well with the Zhuangzi as well. So Zhuangzi is basically coming from this aspect as well, where a lot of his text doesn't have a lot of politics or how to govern a nation. I mean, he pokes fun at Confucianism and this and that, as does the Tao Te Ching pokes fun at Confucianism and artificial societies.
Yes.
So my first chapter is actually chapter 12. Now, I picked this chapter only because it's really relevant in the modern day. There are a lot of better chapters than this, in my opinion, from a spiritual aspect, like chapter 16, for example. But chapter 12 speaks about the desires of the belly and the desires of the eye. Now, I think that this chapter is really important in the modern day, particularly in this attention economy that we have in the world today with social media, where everyone's vying for your attention. Everyone wants to kind of waste your time, basically. And part of that that breeds a lot of desires of the eye. So these artificial desires that are far off in the distance that none of us can taste, touch, or smell, right? So you might be told by a famous entrepreneur that you can do it. You can go out and live the American dream. You can be a billionaire overnight, but it's in the distance. It's not something that's a reality, right? And so the desires of the belly is basically the natural desires that we naturally have, right? Food, clothing, shelter, sex, so forth and so on. And so I really like this chapter because it kind of like puts reality in its place for us, right? It kind of reorients our awareness back to where we ought to be. Like, because if we do operate from the desires of the belly, then the Tao kind of opens up for you. And in this chapter, they use 5 as like a word for extravagance, right? So like you can think of Madison Avenue and this and that. But towards the end of the chapter, it kind of says, therefore the sages care for the stomach and not the eyes, right? So the sage doesn't care about these artificial desires. They're always bringing their mind back to this natural aspect.
Yeah, this chapter 12 is actually doesn't get any more clearer lesson for us today, isn't it? Like, desire of the eye and the belly. That, nowadays we only follow desire of the eye, really. So, yes, this chapter definitely has a very direct relation to the modern days that we are living today, I think.
That's right. And that's why I picked it. I feel like it's very important for people to kind of come back and center themselves too. Like, say if they've been going through a situation in life where they're riddled with busyness and striving and they're not actually getting anywhere, use this chapter to recenter and be grateful for what you actually have in life. Because a lot of things that we have in life today, just 100 years ago, people didn't have. Like, for example, our living situations now in the modern day with all of the modern housing and the comfortability and convenience did not exist just 100 years ago. But still we complain. We still complain. Whereas if you went to London just 100 years ago, people are throwing their pot full of shit and piss into the streets, if you can believe it, right? We didn't have clean sanitation in most parts of the world. But we still complain now, right? So I feel like this is a good chapter for people to pivot, bring their mind back to reality and focus on the simple things in life, the relationships they have, clean food, shelter, and just being grateful for everything that you have.
Yeah, I think more of the civilization progressed and more things becoming available for us, and life becomes much more comfortable and easy somewhat, so that we easily lose the desire of the belly, how important that is, right?
Yeah.
So we are getting too distracted by desire of the eye, so that we miss what's really important. But when the world becomes more complicated and there's more temptations out there, actually we need to revert back to our own belly and see what's really has to be done for ourselves, right?
That's right.
So my next chapter is chapter 5, which is talking about actually the impartiality of the universe. And he also mentions about the morality of the society. So how we understand that Lao Tzu is not very big fan of morality. So he is following as a law of nature, law of Tao, that is being like a universal scale, like a cosmic law. It's natural law, right? And Lao Tzu put the emphasis in somewhat like again, the universal law is a natural human life and its possibility, instead of interfering with it. Again, like non-interference is a big message of Lao Tzu as well. And another thing in this chapter mentions that about the usefulness of bellow, right? How empty space within the bellow actually generates the energy of the bellow. It's very counterintuitive somewhat in modern days, because we are trying to, I don't know, achieve a lot of things and go out and chase to get the degrees and fill out your portfolio to show for to get a job or something, or just to show to people and whatnot. But here Lao Tzu is mentioning that actually the empty space within the bellow, what makes bellow so useful. And actually, in a way, the bigger the empty space is, bellow becomes even more useful, right? So somewhat I think it relates to the aspect of the element of the virtue. The is virtue, and that virtue can only naturally get emanated out into the world when you're really becoming yourself, right? Instead of trying to keep up with the appearance and your abilities and skills and whatnot, but just trying to be truly who you are naturally, that you get to practice that natural virtue.
That's right, yeah. I love these metaphors in the Tao Te Ching, like the bellows, the valley spirit, which are alluding to that sort of power and of emptiness, of stillness, right? And we see that in this chapter where like the bellows is completely empty, but it contains all that power to manifest, right? And so I feel that the valley spirit, the bellows, even the cup analogy is kind of where it's at, because it's what it's basically saying is there's usefulness also in nothingness as well, as opposed to like clinging to things per se, right? Because the bellows itself, just as a thing, has no purpose. It's its function that gives it something, right? And so that's the same for us. It's in emptiness that gives us the function that's necessary, right, in this life. This meat suit is just a thing.
Yes.
It's the emptiness that's contained within our mind that allows our life to reverberate into the ages.
Yeah, in the very last part, it actually says that more words count less. Right?
Yeah.
Hold fast to the center.
Yeah.
So if I were to put the other way around, less words count more, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so like how, people make look good and literally having a lot of words, but in the end there is no substantial use to that, right?
Yeah.
So that, so the having then that empty space, and it looks nothing, but it's full of energy, full of usefulness, and hold fast to the center of the Tao, which is where all the power of the Tao, the center of the universe, emanate from.
That's right. My next chapter is chapter 25, and I love this chapter because, again, we're going back to the sort of the metaphysics of the Tao, which aligns with the first chapter, actually. But there's many of these chapters, right? But I really like, in particular, towards the end of this chapter, where in Derek Lynn's translation, he says that humans follow the laws of earth, earth follows the laws of heaven, heaven follows the laws of Tao, Tao follows the laws of nature, right? And at the start of the chapter, it actually states that there is something formlessly created, born before heaven and earth, so silent, so ethereal. And so, again, we're going back to sort of the metaphysics of the Tao, and I like this kind of perspective from the microcosm to the macrocosm. And so, in Taoism, the human being is a reflection of this whole process. So, we are, let's say, if we were to use the Big Bang as an analogy, if you believe in that, we are still the Big Bang coming on as a human, right? It's still, the process is still happening through us because we are the end point of Uchi. Right, so Uchi, Tao, and stillness, and then that's what this process is kind of talking about, right? So there's Uchi, the Tao, and stillness, and then the first movement out is Tai Chi, which is Tao in motion, which then gives birth to Yin and Yang, which then gives birth to the 10,000 things, and so forth and so on, right? And so it all comes from that Tao of stillness, but it moves through Tai Chi into the yin and yang, and that becomes the human reflection of the universe, right? So we are a reflection of that process, the human being is. Other sentient life is as well, but like in Taoism, they would say we're a complete reflection of that because we can be cognizant of this actual process, right? A dog's not sitting around thinking about Uchi, Tai Chi, Yin Yang. Well, maybe they are, but in a different way, right? And so you see this reflection from the microcosm, the macrocosm. And so, you know, there's a phrase in Taoism, the big picture and the small picture are the same picture.
Yes.
Right. And so that's why I really love this chapter, because it really hones in on that the Tao moves through all life. No matter whether it's earth, the heavens, the stars, or the blood in our body.
Yes.
Right. That thing that's moving without even our conscious awareness is the Tao.
Yes.
We often use the body as an analogy for the Tao because we don't know our digestive processes. We know we're digesting food, but we don't know how it operates. These things are happening without our control, right? And so one of the great teachings in Taoism, like what this chapter is saying, that law, that kind of Taoist law, is that's why we actually should let go. Because if you understand that all of these processes are happening within your body, the movement of the stars are unvarying, the planet is still spinning around doing its thing, and we have no control over that. Why do we try to control certain things in our lives, right? Okay, we can control the controllables in our life, right? But they are very small as opposed to what we actually don't control in our life.
Yeah, so it's kind of a put us place where we get to think about our existence in the entire universe, right? Mm-hmm. You can think that universe is so vast and infinite, and what does it mean to be a human being, right? But as you said, the macrocosm and microcosm analogy, at the end of the universe, here we are, the human beings, right? But then at the same time, at the end of the universe, here we are, and here we have another universe begins, in a sense, because us being a microcosm of macrocosm universe, that we have our own universe, our own organism going, as in individual, biologically, as in society, globally as well. So it has its own life that's taking place.
That's right. No, we don't control that law.
No,
it's we are the, like you said, the end of that. And so in letting go and allowing that process to move through you, going back to the other chapter that you mentioned with the bellows, if we harness that emptiness, like what you were saying, there's a type of de or virtue that is there, but we don't get that in clinging to things or controlling. Right? It's just there through our emptiness.
Yes, and so. What I've got is chapter 38. Yep. So some people like to dissect Tao Te Ching into two parts, which is between first one to 37th. Some people say that Tao Ching. So Ching means basically scriptures or text or something like that. So the text about Tao itself, like a more philosophical aspect. And from 38 to 81 is the Te Ching. So it's more like a virtuous aspect, the like a functionality of virtue, and how should be practiced naturally, obviously, from ourselves as a human being as well. So the 38 being the first chapter of Te Ching, the second part of Tao Te Ching. So Lao Tzu talks a lot about the virtue, and throughout the chapter, he mentions what's not the true sense of virtue. So from explaining what is not, he's, I think, emphasizing what is actually the real virtue it is. So he actually goes through a lot about like justice and kindness and righteousness and ritual and so on, which is actually very coincide with the four virtues of Confucianism. And he critiquing those virtues, because once those virtues are exercised within the community or society, that means the real virtue has disappeared, basically. Because a real sense of virtue is without justice, without the concept of kindness or ritual righteousness. It should just happen naturally, just like how water flows from top to the bottom, right? So he also criticizing that how these having these four virtues pushed onto people actually creates disingenuous people. We know this, right? Because in Confucianism, they push a lot of these virtues and a lot of rules to be the gentleman, the junza concept and this and that. But we know that we are, again, just like a block of wood analogy, we are naturally good. We are naturally have our own uniqueness and beauty and whatnot, right? So more you try to carve the block, you lose your true nature. And that's what Lao Tzu is trying to get to through this chapter. So that I found it's very important chapter for us to remind ourselves how important it is for ourselves to be naturally who we really are.
That's right. Well, it really correlates to a modern day as well, right? Like the warring states period of China and now, obviously there are a lot of things that are different, but that type of mentality, that sort of contrived morality, contrived goodness still exists today, right? Contrived righteousness, which is a big one in the modern day. And so Lao Tzu's point, it's our inability to be natural. And it's kind of strange to him because it's very easy for him to be natural and not to be hung up on certain things, right? So he can go through a whole gamut of emotions, but always come back to his own equilibrium. And so in the modern day, and people who were indoctrinated with Confucianism, they have a certain perspective of the world. And if you interfere with that, then that's when all hell breaks loose, right? Or if you expose it for being stupid, then all hell breaks loose, right? And we see that in the modern day as well. So my next chapter is chapter 28. Now, I could have picked many other chapters. There are a lot of other chapters, right? Like I said, chapter 16 is one of my favorite. Chapter 4, there's so many other chapters. And this one is about how we have to be in the world, right? As opposed to how people think they should be in the world. So this is, again, to your point, this sort of naturalness. And this is part of the first part, like what you were saying, after the part. So that really relates to the later chapters, after 57, especially after chapter 57 when we're talking about politics and war and nations and everything like this. But chapter 28 here is talking about how we actually have to be in that sort of situation, in that moment, right? And so in Derek Lynn's translation, he says, know the masculine, hold to the feminine, be the watercourse of the world. Be in the watercourse of the world, the eternal virtue does not depart. And so again, this is understanding the fine balance between yin and yang, right? I mentioned, I think it was Fasting the Mind, where people like to think of yin and yang as an equal distribution, right? And so I use the chocolate powder and milk analogy, where I say, okay, grab a blender, put half chocolate powder, half milk, and see what happens. You have to have a fine balance between a little bit of powder and more milk to have a delicious chocolate drink, right? And so in Jia Fu Feng's translation, he says, hold to know the yin, but use the yang conservatively.
Yes.
Right? And so yin here being kind of that sort of stillness, complete nothingness actually, right? And so we live in a yin deficient world at the moment because we're doing. And so we are just yang oriented, and so we're burnt out. We're burning the candle at both ends. That's why we have the world we have. That's why people are burnt out individually. And it's not just in action, it's in thinking a lot too, right? People are always thinking about their plight in life and have not embraced this kind of idleness, which like Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi really recommend. And actually, just a couple of generations ago, idleness was actually really applauded because it was in idleness that ideas come to yourself, right? So you and I will go for a walk, even together and sometimes when we're on our own, but we never put the earplugs in that in, right? And so because you want to just sit there with your thoughts and see where it takes you. Lao Tzu is against always having someone telling you something. Doesn't matter what it is, right? So we live in the information economy, right? Where someone is always telling you something. Eradicate that and just see what's inside yourself. Even though you may have been indoctrinated by what other people have told you, but still listen to what's inside there, right? And so That's the importance of knowing the yin, because if you know the yin, then you'll be able to act immediately and appropriately to each and every situation. So your action will be right, as opposed to just acting, doing all the time.
It seems like sometimes we underestimate the power of yin a lot of the times. And we just more like rely on the yang part of the Tao. I think because I guess yang is more like a force and feels more like visible, that you can conceive, you can feel, and is strong like this, right? But yin is obviously the quiet, more calm and peaceful, this type of energy. So that people might not feel as much powerful as yang energy. But as you mentioned, yin energy is somewhat, especially nowadays, is actually more important. We have to somewhat like maybe overcompensate to yin energy to even make the balance between yin and yang these days. I think that our subconscious energy also run within the yin part. And also relaxation, and as you mentioned, with going for a walk and just having a resting and relaxing time itself is yin energy. And from having that yin lifestyle, where you get a lot of motivation, a lot of the energy to actually create something, to actually finally manifest something. So yin energy is actually somewhat, nowadays people have to take more in consideration, I think.
That's right. Well, people don't even know that even when they're relaxing, they're still yang oriented, right? Like, that's the problem. So like I mentioned with idleness, people aren't sitting there sipping a tea just looking out at the birds. That's not happening. They're sitting there sipping a tea looking at their phone. This is still yang. You're still functioning from the sympathetic nervous system. So you're not functioning from the parasympathetic nervous system, which needs to be nourished. And the only way to nourish that is through yin. And so Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi, their kind of recommendation is that we should be more in the yin always than in the yang, because we don't need to act too much, right? Like, going back to your point about naturalness, like our actions should just be natural. They shouldn't be contrived as well. Like, I've got a plan, I've got a schedule. We see all these advertisements these days for work scheduling platforms. I mean, it's a headache just to even have a schedule. It's work, right? So just do what is needed to be done. Those things that need to be done usually you don't have to think too much about. That's Lao Tzu's point, right? And so we have to come back to that sort of yin orientation and embrace methods of doing that. Obviously meditation, just having a simpler life, sitting in idleness, doing nothing, embracing boredom, which is something that people don't like, because the reason why they run away from boredom is because they're so wound up tightly that when you turn the juice off, there's still a bit of energy. It's like the ceiling fan analogy, right? You turn the juice off the ceiling fan, there's still some juice left there.
That's right.
And so people can't fight with that temporary moment of boredom. And boredom is usually only temporary. You only feel boredom because you've been way too busy. Lao Tzu and Chuang-Tzu would have never felt boredom because they were just embodied in boredom. They were just embodied in yin, right?
Yes.
So they would have never felt that. And so that's about it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So guys, we've come on a long journey together. That's a little brief review. It's been a pleasure for Guiyang and I to go through each chapter of the Tao Te Ching. And like I said earlier, we feel like it's probably the most comprehensive contemplation and exploration of the Tao Te Ching that's ever been recorded. And so we hope you all enjoyed. And we don't take your support for granted. And like I said, leave a comment if you've been there since day one, or tell us when you started watching the podcast, and we'd love to hear that. Anything else to say, love?
I just wanted to say thank you, everyone who were listening and watching for 81 meditations of the Tao Te Ching. And it's been a great journey to even study and learn about that Taoism. So, it's been great.
So, guys, we hope you all enjoyed. And Guiyang and I will see you along the way, along the Tao.